Okay, so I've got my watercolor and I've got some brushes. Now these three brushes, they're all Artist Loft from Michaels. These are sort of the cheaper ones. I've got a number 4 round, sort of your standard brush. I've got a number 8 round, and I've got a 1/2 inch flat. I like the flat ones for larger areas. If you don't have any of these brushes, regular old brush will do. This is my absolute favorite brush. It's called a pointed filbert, but I went out and especially searched for this brush because I wanted it, and it was really difficult to find. So I'm not going to be using this so much. What I am going to be doing is starting with a wash of color from the tutorial that I posted. You'll note some of the terms. So this wash of color, I'm just going to sort of do a landscapey type thing, and it's all going to be in grays. So we're just going to put down a whole whack of color. Now my experiment with this watercolor tea medium is it takes a lot of layers to really get anything. Now my mistake was I didn't boil the tea down afterwards. I just sort of brewed it and left it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the tea settle in places. And hopefully I'll get some sort of clouds. I don't even know what really I'm going to be doing. I'm thinking maybe there's a horizon line. I'm going to just sort of paint in sort of some foreground color. Now I did tape down my paper with some painter's tape. I find that if you don't tape it down, it starts to bubble and buckle, and you can see it doing that already. You can see the paint is starting to collect, right? Sort of, it's spilling towards the edge where it's taped down, and you'll get, wherever the paint pools and dries, you'll get a darker color. So maybe this is water. That's what this is. It's water, and there's going to be some rocks in the foreground here, and I'm just going to put that in. So the main thing with watercolor is that it takes layers and patience, and you have to let the layers dry. I have not really a picture in mind. I'm sort of developing the picture in my head as I go, and you probably have a real difficult time seeing because it's so light. So I'm going to let this dry and settle in certain areas. The other thing you can do from one of the techniques is you take your brush, and I just sort of squish it out with my fingers, and you can use this damp brush to sort of pick up certain areas where you want it to be a little bit lighter. You can dry it off a little bit on a paper towel, or you can just squeegee it out with your fingers. So I'm going to pause this, and we're going to let it dry, and then we'll be back and I'll show you what happened with it. Okay, so I cheated a little bit. I used a hairdryer to get it mostly dry, but you want to have it on a low setting, otherwise you'll blow the water all over the place. You can see how light it is. You can sort of barely tell, and the pink color of the tea has started to turn gray. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to try and add a few more layers and see if I can get it darker. So I'm going to try and get a few more layers in the sky here, just so I can get some more clouds. These are going to be clouds. So I'm just going to sort of try and drop a layer of watercolor here and there, and try not to mess with it too much. Because what you'll find is this area here is still a bit wet, so it's this one. If I put the watercolor, the new watercolor or tea, close to that area, it'll start to blend in. If I put it on the dry, it'll stay where I put it. But if I put it here, you can see it automatically starts to spread, and it goes into the areas that were wet before. which can be done to your advantage and it creates different effects. That's not what I'm looking for here. So I'm just going to add a few more layers of watercolor. Using tea as watercolor takes a lot of patience because it's so light, but I think it actually helps you learn how to layer properly in watercolor. One of the biggest mistakes that I used to make when I did watercolor is I wouldn't be adding enough water. I'd be using the watercolor as rich paint color and it just never quite turned out right. So you need a lot of patience with watercolor. You just sort of have to add a few layers at a time. And working with only this one light gray is useful for learning how to add value, because one of the things that makes any artwork more realistic or more interesting is a range in value and contrast. If the work doesn't have any contrast, it's not going to turn out so hot. So I'm going to add just a few more cloudy type shapes, a few more areas of dark. I want these to be rocks. I'm not sure if this is going to be an ocean or if I'm going to put trees here eventually. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm going to blend the horizon here so that it's not such a harsh white line, which you probably can't see because it's kind of a little bit light. So I'm going to stop right there and we will grab the hairdryer again and we'll come back. Okay, we're back again. And I don't know if you can see what's going on with the painting. Not a lot. Different tea reacts differently, as I've discovered. Orange pekoe or black tea, you can make different sort of darknesses. You can water it down and make them different darknesses. But with this particular tea, it's so light that there's really no watering it down. I'm just going to continue trying to look at the shapes that I already have. Like I said, I don't really have a plan in mind. I've got something going on here where all the water and the tea settled that I'm not particularly happy with. I don't know what that is. This is looking kind of tree-like, so maybe I turn this into trees and leave these as clouds. So maybe it's not an ocean. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. So let's decide. I'm going to decide that this is now a group of trees. Do you know what else? This is going to be a waterfall. That's what it's going to be. That's what it looks like to me. So that's what I'm going to work with. Originally I was thinking clouds and ocean, but that's not where this painting seems to be going. So I'm going to turn it into a waterfall. So here's what I've got. I've got some trees here and some trees here. And then we've got a cliff like this. Some trees this way. And the cliff is on this side as well. I have to make sure that there's enough land up at the top here. And I'm going to let the paint settle particularly because of the type of paint that I'm using, which is not paint, but tea. We can't really get a darker color. The darker areas are where the paint dries, where it sits. So if you just put it on and leave it, it'll dry in a puddle and that'll create a darker value. So look at these little fluffs down here. That looks like the water kind of churning up. And then instead of having a lake, so this is water. This is the disturbance in the water from the waterfall. And what are we going to do over here? Looks kind of like Iceland. I'm going to work on these rocks in the foreground a little bit. I like having the rocks in the foreground because it kind of gives you something to draw you into the painting. Right, so the center of focus is going to be this waterfall. We've got not a lot going on here. We've got stuff going here, and it kind of guides you in. And that's one technique that you can use to make your paintings, your composition interesting. Had I planned this out in advance, maybe I would do it differently. I'm not sure, but this is kind of like automatic painting. I just sort of started, and then I wanted to see where it went. So I don't know how good this is going to turn out, but I'm going to do a little bit of fast forward for you. I'll paint a little bit more, and then I'll hopefully show you the results in the end. But I'm just sort of winging it. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I can rescue it in the end with some fine line marker. I'm not sure. Let's see how she goes. Okay, try a different angle. That's what I got so far. Starting to look like maybe something. I think I'm going to have to rescue it in the end with some fine line marker, but I'm getting some shapes, and we'll see where this goes. So I'm going to continue on painting, and I'll spare you the drama of me going through trying to figure out how to make these shapes darker when my paint is tea and not paint. So I'm going to give it a try, and I'll come back and I'll show you the results. I think this will be the final results, and maybe we'll do some drawing as well. Okay, so here's what I've got. I used a hairdryer on low to try and get rid of all the puddles. This is quite a bit different than using watercolor normally, is because I'm just pooling liquid and letting it dry. And that dries into abstract shapes, and then I just sort of turned it into something. But unless you know what I'm aiming for, it's very abstract. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some line art. I'm just going to be very sketchy with it. So let's see. I'm going to try this one here. I'm just going to be very sketchy with it. I'm just going to try and outline some of the broken lines, outline some of the rocks. I'm just following with what my watercolor tea had naturally wanted to do. So I'm just going to follow along and create a little bit of definition with a 0.2 micron. Just playing around. This is totally an experiment. I had no plan when I started this. I just wanted to show you how you can use different materials at home to play around with, experiment with. The whole idea behind this is to let you loosen up a little bit with your art. The grade 10 course is focused on surrealism and pop art and data and all of those things. And the idea behind all of those art movements is that art doesn't have to be fine art. It doesn't have to be framed in a gilded frame and hung in a museum. Lots of different things can be art. Anybody can do art. The idea behind the automatic drawing and the spontaneous watercolor is that your subconscious has really great ideas. You just need to learn how to listen to them. So that's what I'm hoping that you'll get out of this. If you don't get a brilliant piece of art out of all of this, that's fine. It's more about learning and trying new things and just making art fun again. I think it's important to do art, especially in times like these, where everything is so uncertain and nobody knows what's going on, and we're kind of all isolated. But you know what? You can always make art. So I'm going to outline these. My goal for this is to make this into sort of the mist that comes from a roaring waterfall. I'm just following along with what is already here. And these are just the patterns and shapes that were made by the tea settling in different areas. And I did purposefully add tea to certain areas to make them darker, but it's really just sort of automatic, random. The other thing you want to make sure of when you're doing watercolor is, and another reason why I wanted you to do this kind of activity, is with watercolor, you kind of have to learn to let go. A lot of us want to control everything, and we want to make art that is very controlled. And when we don't have control over our medium, it can be very frustrating. And I found that with watercolor is I really didn't like that it didn't do what I wanted it to do necessarily. So you kind of have to learn that watercolor has a mind of its own, and all you have to do is let it do its thing, and you'll get really great results. So learning to let go of control can be an enlightening experience. I found that the Mind of Watercolor YouTube channel is very good for letting go of control. And the first 12 paintings I did while following along were terrible, but I created a handful that were pretty good. And, I was able to create some Christmas gifts out of it and, make art that I was proud of. But you have to let go. Our watercolor reacts differently than other mediums, and if you're not used to using it and you want to control it, it might not go so well for you. One thing you want to remember with watercolor is that there is no white. Yes, I know like some watercolor sets come with white, but really it just makes things muddy and gross. So the white is the paper. So one of the things you have to learn when doing watercolor is to leave the white. So here, at the bottom of the waterfall, at the horizon line, in different places, I've left the white so that there is a contrast. And when I'm doing these lines, I don't want to complete the lines because I don't want it to be like an illustration. And even with illustrations, you don't want to make solid cartoony lines. I'm just giving kind of sketchy, broken lines just to give the idea that there are shapes there. And those shapes might be trees, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll find out. And I'm not going to fill in all the shapes. I'm going to let some of them sit as they are. I just want the suggestion that there's something going on. And I'm going to make that, this is a rock, I've decided. And then literally just being very sketchy with it. I'm trying to figure out how to make these abstract blobs and shapes of tea into something that might very well be recognizable. And hopefully this helps and we get something out of it in the end. So let's see here. And just gonna just do some over here, and then I think I'm good. So if you don't have watercolor at home, and you don't have paper or brushes, try one of the other techniques, the spontaneous drawing techniques, and try and create something. I'll probably post a video later of a spontaneous drawing technique that I used to use all the time, and I sometimes would create paintings out of it. For those of you who don't have access to watercolor or paper or that kind of thing. All right, that's pretty abstract. I think I might have to add a little bit of value, maybe just put a few more lines at the bottom here, just to make things darker. Maybe some stippling would help. We'll do some stippling here. I think I might play around with this a little bit later and I'll post the results, but this is what I've got so far. So I'm just adding line work to make it into something. This is just my spontaneous watercolor or alternative watercolor, and you can give it a try too. I hope you have fun.